Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Welcome back. This is Lee McWhorter, cybersecurity instructor for WazU. Welcome to the third lecture workshop on the threats and vulnerability class that began 2 weeks ago and wraps up this Sunday. We have already covered the first 7 lessons of this course, and I know that the numerous students in this class are rocking along through the materials and working through many of the hands-on labs and exercises in this class. We have 3 last lessons to cover, and they are all hands-on. It alternates between using the standalone VMs that we provided in this course, as well as our last visit in lesson 9 to the our wonderful topology we've been using throughout the program in GNS3. So, we've got a really important concept to cover in the last lesson. So I'm going to spend most of my time on that today, but let me take you through the first lesson 8 and lesson 9 first. In this class, we have been digging deeper into threats and vulnerabilities, looking at things like indicators of compromise and baselining and things like that. And then we've had some fun with social engineering, learning a little bit more about the motivational factors behind social engineering, as well as being exposed to the social engineering toolkit and getting to play with a fun little, I hope you found fun, spear phishing exercise using the standalone virtual machines. And then we wrapped up last week talking a little bit about just additional vulnerabilities. And so actually, we're basically carrying on with that, excuse me, in lessons 8, 9, and 10. So we finished up last week talking about some additional vulnerability types and some more depth on those as we round out our program here. And so now we're going to use these last 3 lessons to kind of get hands-on and play with some additional vulnerabilities. So in lesson 8, you already have the Kali VM set up. You would have used that in the spear phishing exercise back in lesson 6. So the setup for lesson 8 is you are going to, if you haven't already, and I know some of you students have just gone and gotten everything out of the download folder and gone ahead and pre-installed it. But if you haven't, then you'll be guided through installing the Meta Exploitable 2 virtual machine. We have played with Meta before within the GNS3 topology. That is a Docker appliance, as I've pointed out to students in the past. Most of the stuff in there, besides the BYOS and the Firefox appliances, are all Docker images. And so we've done things like break into the very secure web application that had a vulnerability, right? And we're able to do that both manually as well as with Metasploit. We have run some password cracking with Hydra against it. We've done other types of attacks, SQL and others. Some of those we instead did against the damn vulnerable web application. Metasploit actually has an older version of damn vulnerable built into it itself. As we know from various Nmap and other scans in the past, open BAS scans, that Metasploit is exactly as it says. It's very exploitable. There are dozens and dozens of possible exploits. And so we're going to be doing one that we have to do in the VM, and that's one of the reasons we provided it for this class. This one does not work in the topology, and that's because it relies on an older version of the Linux kernel, which is in the full VM like you have for this class. But because the Meta Exploitable 2 Docker appliance that I built is really running on a little bit more modern version of Ubuntu, it doesn't have some of those kernel exploits. And so a few of the things do not work in that version that will work in the full version. And this is actually one of my favorite demonstration exploits from Meta Exploitable. Many of them, as I've said, are sadly almost too easy. It's like type a line and boom, I've got root. Do this and boom, I've got root. And that's good to experiment with them. As I've mentioned to many of you when we've had our one-on-ones, as you finish this course, you get to obviously keep all these VMs, you get to keep all these topologies. And as you continue to study, especially if you're interested in the red team side of things, then I highly recommend you grab yourself a Meta Exploitable 2 guide and work your way through it and do all the other exploits that we didn't even cover in our program just to get that red team and that pen testing experience. But most of them are pretty straightforward. I've tried to pick some of the little bit more fun ones. And this one I find to be really cool. And it dovetails with something you have to put your memory cap on and think back. to the second course in the program, our Network Foundations course. If you remember in that course, we created an Ubuntu server, just console, command line, virtual machine. And as part of lesson 2 and 3, you were setting up that virtual machine, and then you were setting it up so that you could access it remotely, from your machine to the virtual machine, from your host desktop using PuTTY or Solar PuTTY to connect into that virtual machine. And then we showed you how to create the public-private SSH key pairs, and of course you've had cryptography and access management now too, so you fully get how that works, that those are paired up, and then we inject the public key into that virtual machine, and then we are able to connect with our public key and a private key match, and it lets us log in. And we even finished that by turning off the ability to even use passwords anymore on that virtual machine. And as I mentioned in that class, and I'll repeat here, this is how the cloud works. If you spin up a virtual machine, an Amazon Web Services virtual machine, for example, you will generate, as part of that, creating and launching that VM, you will create a public and private key pair. Amazon prefers not to use usernames and passwords because they're much more easily hacked. So they want you to create a public private key pair, and then when you launch that virtual machine in the cloud, Amazon will inject that public key into that VM, and you download the private key. And basically, just like we did in those lessons in Network Foundations, you use PuTTY or your SSH client with the command line, and you tell it, okay, I want to connect to this IP or this server with this key, and the keys match, and you get access. So it's a very powerful way, and why many organizations, not only in the cloud but even internally, through public key infrastructure, manage access to resources and servers and instances within their environments. So what's fun about this exercise is we are going to learn about a new piece that we haven't talked about before, something called NFS, Network File System, or Network File Sharing Service, the different definitions sometimes of that, an acronym. But this is a networking protocol that allows for the mounting of a remote drive. Mapping. It's basically it's similar, at least, let's put it that way. It's similar to, say, Microsoft's and other Samba's SMB protocol, the server message block protocol. So it allows, when you're running the NFS software and the Metasploitable 2 VM is running it, it is exporting or sharing a share out to other machines that could then mount that drive. Now, SMB is a non-routable protocol, so you can't do that over the internet. Like, you can't be at your house, and just because your friend has shared their game server or their picture folder or their music folder on their computer, you can't get to that and map that drive. Now, if you were in their house on their network, then you could map a drive over to that share. Well, NFS is network routable. It's internet routable. It's TCP/IP compliant. So you can, if you're using NFS, share a drive, and somebody could mount that drive. And it's primarily, even though there's ways to make it work on other platforms, it's primarily a Unix or Linux toy in a sense, and it's a common way for sharing data. I've used it myself in its own kind of security way. Especially back in the past, a lot of clients, I used to have a lot of clients that not only had a website, but because they're business clients and they sometimes need one of their clients to upload maybe a big file for them, a design file or something, so they can do their job. Then I used to run a lot of FTP servers, just anonymous FTP servers, drop boxes, so people could just drop those files in. And I always set them up so nobody could see what was in there, so one client couldn't see what the other people were doing, for privacy. But then I used a trick of my FTP servers over here, and I want, when somebody uploads something through the website, to put it into that same folder. So I would share that file between. And it was kind of really cool because, as you're learning, and you'll see more in lesson 9, there is the ability, if things aren't set up right, you can, or if you're using like an upload folder, then somebody can upload something else. Maybe you think you're going to upload a zip file that's supposed to be a design file for that client, but some hacker is trying to upload a script or trying to upload something that they can use to hack. Well, they think they're putting it on the web server, but behind the scenes, because of that shared drive, it's actually being stored on another machine. And it used to frustrate attackers a lot because they would be trying to get it to run on this machine, but it's not even near anymore. So there are definitely uses for network file sharing, just like there are uses for sharing. But in the case of this demonstration that we're going to do, and as I said, I'm not going to show it, I'm just going to walk you through it. You're going to be using the Kali Linux VM and the Metasploitable VM. Remember, we won't need any GNS3 running. This is going to be a lesson 8 is all VMs. As you know now, you've heard it enough from me, but we always either do one or the other, not both in the same assignments. So we're going to be using just those 2 VMs, and you're going to want to make sure that, they can ping each other and stuff like that. And then what you're going to do is on the Kali, remember it has 2 network adapters, so you'll be able to do this. It should have one that's able to talk on the local host-only network of all of these VMs, and then it has a NAT adapter so it can get out to the internet. So you're going to have to do an apt-get and install the NFS common tools so that you can then do some probing over there and look for that. It's not on, NFS is kind of an older protocol. You still will find it out in the wild occasionally, but less and less so. And this is admittedly an older exploit, as all of them are in Metasploitable, but we're going to need to install those tools, and you'll work through the exercise and you'll scan over there on Meta and you'll see, oh yeah, it is sharing some stuff. It is running that software. And you can see that actually from an Nmap scan, because you can see that it has certain ports and port mapper and mount and other tools running on certain ports. Now, so how are we going to use this? Well, once you do the first few steps of this assignment, you're going to see that, hey, they're sharing not just a specific folder somewhere down on the file system, they're sharing the whole root drive. They're sharing the whole drive. It's like equivalent if you shared your whole drive C on your local network at home. Now, technically, various permissions and other things should have still made that safe, but once again, this is the vulnerable version. And so what this allows us to do is to kind of flip that lesson from Network Foundations on its head. Instead of being, creating our own public-private key and being able to get in securely to our instances, we're going to create a public-private key. So you're going to be taken through on the Kali VM, just like we did in Network Foundations. You're going to create a public and private key. We acutely in the lesson call it the hacker public and hacker private key, because we are playing the hacker role here. And so we're going to create a public and private key. And then we're going to mount that NFS drive from Metasploitable onto our Kali machine so that it's under the /mnt mount path. And what this then allows us to do, which is thankfully fixed in more modern versions of both the Linux kernel and the NFS software suite, but in this one, it's vulnerable. And so what this is going to allow us to do in principle is we're going to take that public key that we created. Welcome, Ben. How you doing? And so we're going to take that public key, and through the ability of the NFS that they're sharing that entire drive, we're going to actually put it right on the root user's key ring, his authorized or his or her authorized keys file in .ssh. And of course, just like we did in Network Foundations, once that public key is on that key ring, then we can use SSH from the Kali machine to log into Metasploitable with our matching private key, and boom, we're on and we are the root user, and we will have once again owned a box, or in this box multiple times we've owned it. So it's a really neat exploit vulnerability demonstration. In this case, it really relies on both some vulnerabilities in the NFS software as well as in the vulnerabilities of the kernel underneath. But it's a really neat one because, like I said, it's a multi-step one. You're having to kind of analyze and make sure that that's running. Then you have to connect and mount that drive. You have to generate the public and private keys, and then you have to inject with a copy. You're going to concatenate that file onto the end of the key ring. Well, that's if you're a nice hacker, or you could actually just replace it with your own key if you were a mean hacker. But in principle, we're going to get that public key we just made over there onto that machine through that network file share. And then once it's there, then we have the private key, and now we'll be able to log in as root. So I'm not going to demo that one, but basically that's kind of the steps. You're going to load the NFS tools, scan things just to see it and see how that works. You're going to generate your own public-private key pair for your hacker on the Kali machine. You're going to mount that share from the vulnerable target. We're going to copy the key over, and then we're going to own that box. And so pretty straightforward. It's just using those two VMs. So not quite as intensive as the previous social engineering toolkit demo where we had to run 3 VMs. So you just have to run Kali and Metasploitable, and Meta will be the only one you haven't gotten yet at this point, and the instructions are in the lesson if you haven't already done it yourself. Then when we switch into lesson 9, we actually switch back for the last time to the famous GNS3 topology that we've worked with throughout network defense, logging and monitoring, and now threats and vulnerability. We've already played with the damn vulnerable web app before. We did SQL injection on it in lessons 9 and 10 of the network defense class. We used SQL map initially as a vulnerability tool to confirm that copy that's over there is vulnerable to SQL injection. And then we went on and ultimately gained usernames and passwords from that in the lesson 10 as part of becoming a pen test tool and using SQL map that way. Well, damn vulnerable has lots of stuff, just like Meta does. Lots of stuff we're not even going to cover, but we're going to come and talk to a couple. We're going to play with a couple more, and we do it in the topology because it's set up for that. You theoretically could do a version of this even with the VMs, but do as the lesson calls for, do it in the topology. So you're going to bring up the topology, and what you're going to be doing is you're going to be using the Firefox client that's out on the outside to surf in through, and you can use the open topology, obviously. And then you're going to log, go to the damn vulnerable web app. Just like in network defense, we have to set it up. Remember, it's a Docker appliance, so every time you start it, it comes up like it's freshly installed. So when you first visit that web page, 10.10.10.12, with your Firefox browser in the topology, you're going to get that, you have to scroll down and click that button to create the database. It'll do that on the image, and then it'll take you to the login screen, admin and password, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm 99% sure that's right, but it's in the lesson. The default passwords for damn vulnerable, and you will log in, and you will then have to do the last setup step, which is you will need to go to the damn vulnerable security menu choice and make sure the security is set to low. Change it from the higher insane setting down to the low setting. In the lessons, you actually do get to play with a little bit higher in there as well. So what are we doing in this? Well, we did SQL injection previously. Well, this is, we're going to take advantage of two injection type vulnerabilities on damn vulnerable. One of them is under the files tab, and we're going to use that weakness that really it's not like a vulnerability, it's more of a weakly designed version of the page. But there's a page there with a little form and a browse button. And basically the sort of scenario of that part of damn vulnerable is that, maybe this is a forum, like a posting forum or something, message board. And so you can, like Slack, and so you can upload your avatar picture, right? So this page has a browse box. You can go and pick some file from your local file system and upload it to that machine. Well, it's meant to be for, say, uploading a JPEG or uploading some kind of avatar picture. But because on the low security setting, they don't do any kind of sanity checks at all on what's being uploaded. You can upload anything you want to. So what we're going to do is we're going to upload a copy of a program called NC or Netcat. Netcat is one of those tools like Nmap that over time, and admittedly this is your first real exposure, we may have talked about it briefly I think before, but you're going to use it as part of this lesson in 9. You basically are going to upload Netcat. Netcat is referred to as the Swiss Army knife of the internet, and both troubleshooting and pen testing kind of tools, because what Netcat can do is Netcat can connect to and create a connection for any type of port on any system. And so a very common use of Netcat is to have copies of Netcat running on 2 different machines, and then you have one of them open up a listener, and then you connect into that listener. So that's a great backdoor you've just created. So as you can see, by working through lesson 9, if we're able to use this form, this upload feature of this website that's supposed to allow us to upload an image, but we can upload anything we want to, well then cool. Let's see if we can upload Netcat. And if we can, then great. We now have managed to put a binary up on this machine that we might be able to use to actually be able to open a backdoor on our target. Now, the reality is though, and they do this fairly well, and the lesson takes you through, and even seeing it, you're going to log into the Metasploitable VM itself and go take an LS listing, and you're going to look at where that file was uploaded, and you're going to see that it did successfully upload. But because they do have some base web security, and most websites run as a very low level user, they don't have much permissions. And so you're going to see that that file that you uploaded is owned by this low level user, and it also does not have the execute permissions. Remember, we talked about that back in Network Foundations. We talked about those read RWX, the read write execute permission for the user, the group, and everyone. And even we talked about it again in shell scripting and Bash. If you're going to create a shell script, you have to give it the execute permission if you want to run it at the command line without preceding it with Bash. And so we understand that idea that a program has to be marked with the execute permission before you can run it. So you've managed to upload this file, and it's there. Your NCAT, your backdoor program is sitting on that target, but you can't get to it yet. Well, we're going to have to chain exploits here. We're going to take advantage of the fact that there's another bug in Damn Vulnerable, which allows us to do what's called command injection. So you're going to go over to that page in the Damn Vulnerable website. And once again, there's going to be a little web page with a box. And this is a box that allows you, if you type in an IP address, like you could type in any IP in the topology, and when you click the button, that input will pass in, and the app actually calls the ping program, just like you could type at the prompt yourself. And it will ping any box and come back and give you the results of that ping output. You can technically type in any address because the ping doesn't have to succeed. But if you do type in like 10, 10, 10, 11, 10, 10, 10, 12, 10, 10, 10, 1, whatever, any IP that's valid in the network, then when you click the submit button, that IP will be passed in, the system will run the ping and that IP, and you'll get the results back on that web page. So this is a case where the web page is providing a utility. It's providing a ping utility for a user to use to test if some machine is up. Well, because once again, though, they're not sanitizing the inputs. They're not properly looking to make sure they only take in the input, the IP address in this case that they want, but they will let you put anything else you want to in, sort of like SQL. In this case, we're going to use a trick of the command line where if you put a semicolon after a command, and you could do this on your own just at one of your Ubuntu VMs or one of the appliances in the topology, and you could type like ls space / to give you a listing of the root, semicolon, ls space / bin. And when you hit enter, it'll run both those commands. That semicolon says, oh, hey, Linux, this is a command and this is a command. So what we're going to do with that little box that we put the IP address in is we're going to put in an IP, then we're going to put a semicolon, and then we're going to issue commands. And every time we hit the button, the ping will run. But because of the way Linux works, it's going to say, oh, I'll run the ping. Oh, and here's another command. And it's going to run our command that we injected in. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to do two things. One, we are going to use the the Linux chmod command to change the permissions on the NCAT that we just uploaded. Because if we can give it executable permissions, then maybe we can run it, right? So the lesson will take you through, typing in an IP address, semicolon, and then chmod space / all the path to that file. And you're going to give it probably, I think if I remember right, it's 755 permissions. Or there are other ways to just add executable permission to it. But 755 gives the owner everything and everybody else read and execute. So now this NCAT program that we injected through another vulnerability is now been modified so it's executable. So what do you think we're going to do next? It's pretty straightforward. We're going to go back to that same form. We're going to type in the same IP. We're going to put another semicolon, and this time we're going to run the NCAT program. And we're going to run it so that it opens up a listener. And you could really do it either way. I can't. There's two different kinds of what we call shells in NCAT, either a reverse or a bind shell. And so we can either open up a port. We can run NCAT and say, okay, listen on port 10,000 for any connections, and then over here on our Kali, we can then run NCAT and connect to that. and now we're running this machine. Or we can have the listener on Kali, and then we run NCAT to connect back to Kali. And so there's two different modes of how to do that. At the end of the day, you're able to now type commands on Kali, and they get executed over here on the Metasploitable. This is giving you a shell on that machine. Now, in this case, this one exercise, in and of itself, this does not get us root access, because the web server that has uploaded the file and owns the file is actually obviously running as a lower user. Now, there are other things you could do to escalate your privilege in this case. We could change the ownership of the file. We could try to set the SU ID so that it runs as root or something like that. And that would be the things we would be attempting to do next. But all I want to show here is just the idea of a file injection vulnerability that we can use an upload form sometimes to upload stuff that they weren't envisioning. And then we can use a badly configured command type of input in this case. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a program that runs ping. That just makes it easier because it's already going to pass that out to the system. But there are other ways that we could get a command to run as part of the submission, just like the way SQL map gets SQL statements to run as it passes in that additional information. And if you remember, even in network defense, we showed you how to do that manually as well. So you understand how we're manipulating basically what we're passing in to be able to pass in some additional stuff. And so we're doing the same thing here again through this damn vulnerable. And we're going to pass in the command to change the permissions. We're going to pass in the commands to run the actual NCAT. And so I hope you see the validity, and it's not an uncommon trick, though it's not usually done through that mechanology. These days, it's more likely that maybe somebody has custom compiled a backdoor. They've sent it to their target through a spearfish. If they get them to click it, it opens up and connects back to you, and now you're in their box. But yeah, you could do something like this. This is a legitimate demonstration of attack, where we are uploading that. You know, they maybe for security, they deleted that program off that server. Actually, I know Metasploitable, being a full Linux install, does already have NCAT. So you could skip the first part of uploading and just go straight to running NCAT that's already there. So there's lots of variants, and I encourage you to play with it more. As you see in the exercise, you kind of recreate what you're shown in the lesson, and then you move on to even changing the security up to medium or something, and trying again and finding out what's different about it. It's one of the things cool about Damn Vulnerable is that there is those layers of security, and once again, you're encouraged to play beyond all the stuff we've already covered, especially as you go on and start if you're interested in the red team pen test stuff, because you can turn up the security level and then try again, and things will happen. Like, for example, I'll give you one hint. If you turn up the security level and you try to go upload NC, then it throws a fit and says, hey, you got to upload something that's a JPEG. So it's doing some kind of error correcting there. If it doesn't see .gif, .jpeg, .whatever, it throws an error. Well, there's lots of ways to get around that. Actually, you could use a proxy like Burp Suite to change it on the fly. You could actually just go ahead and call your ncat.jpg and upload it, and then use the command injection later to rename it back. But you don't even have to, because you can run ncat.jpg as long as you put the executable permissions. So the idea is that as you step up the security levels in Damn Vulnerable, they add more challenges. They make it harder. They try to do some degree of, add some sanity to their security. So lesson 8 is using Kali VM and Metasploitable to do a very cool network file system attack and gain root access. We're back in lesson 9 in the topology, and we are using the Firefox outside client and the Damn Vulnerable web app, and obviously the switches and routers in between. You don't have to have the LAN on for this exercise at all. So if you want to keep those units off, that'll free up a little RAM. But you're going to inject a copy of the netcat tool and then play with it to open a shell. And as I said, particularly if you go beyond Security Plus, especially in the red team, you go, say, to Pentest Plus from CompTIA, Nmap, NCAT, and some of the scripting are some of the biggest things that are, and just learning a lot more tools than even we've covered. Spending more time in Kali is a big part of what you're going to need to do. So it's important that you understand what NCAT does. So that leaves us lesson 10 then to wrap up. Lesson 10 is I think a very fun, it's a very cool lesson. We introduced the concepts, even though we've been saying them for a while now, of red team and blue team and even purple team. And purple team is one of those like security by obscurity, one of those few things in our field that's a little controversial because it means different things to different people and whether how it's implemented. But in principle, of course, the red team are the people who are the attackers, and the blue team are the defenders. Um, and in many larger organizations, there are dedicated red team, blue team, and players, people who do that. Like my friend that I've said is a pen tester, he's on the red team. He's constantly attacking when they update versions of their app or their mobile site or whatever. That's his job, to go attack it. And of course, the defenders are trying to defend it. But even if an organization doesn't have dedicated staff, many times they'll run a red team, blue team exercise, maybe as part of compliance, as part of periodically updating their security policy. They run an exercise and they say, okay, here, you 3 or 4 people or 10 or whatever from our company, you're employees, you all work for us and you're cybersecurity, but you're better at the attack. So we want you next week, maybe it's announced and it's known, maybe it's not. Sometime in the next week, we want you to try to conduct an attack, and we're going to have our defenders. They're going to try to defend it. And this can be done on live systems if it's scoped and we're not taking a risk. It also can be done in virtual systems, and it's a very common attack. And the goal is to get to purple, red and blue combined to make purple, right? So what you're trying to do, what everybody's trying to do out there with red team and blue team, especially activities and exercises, is to improve their cybersecurity defenses. They want their red team attackers to really stretch and show and try to get past their defenses and find those holes so that the blue team can fix it. The blue team is learning from the red team and the types of attacks and the ways they're trying to obfuscate their attacks and the evasion techniques they're using, and then trying to close those holes. The controversy comes in that while we all get that, there's some organizations that have truly formed a purple team. I personally, now this is once again, like, I think security by obscurity is kind of in the middle. It's not a panacea. It's not complete failure, only very specific places. Here where I fall is I don't think you should form a purple team. Your goal is to turn your teams purple by working together, having these exercises, learning every so often, coming together for postmortems and lesson learned kind of meetings, and then do another exercise. And you don't need another layer of security people that are supposed to be the purple team. Some people do it. That's an opinion, and maybe I'll be proved and I'll change my mind in some point in future. But to me, you want to have red team and blue team, or at least periodic red team and blue team activities with the goal of turning your entire team purple. But anyway, that's the little bit of controversy. You can read different people's opinions out there. So one of the big things that we talk about in this lesson, beyond just the concepts of red team, blue team, is actually a red team, blue team exercise, or a learning exercise that is very common within our field, within cybersecurity. And those are what we call capture the flag activities. We used to, as kids, all run around and try to capture the flag. The most recent, I wasn't even a kid, not too many years ago, when as part of the Big Brother, Big Sister program, I took my wife and I took our little brothers to go do paintball. And one of the game modes was a capture the flag. They divided us in teams, and there was a flag in each of these buildings, and we had to defend, and the goal was to get in and get that flag. Well, that's basically, in a sense, what a capture the flag VM is, except that we're not trying to get just the one flag usually, and we're not shooting paintballs at each other or running around through the woods. Instead, somebody's built a virtual machine more times than not, or a virtual network. And then as the participant in the game, you will download that virtual machine and use it and try to beat it. Or if you're at one of the cybersecurity cons, you might be part of a capture the flag team where there's multiple teams and the board's up on the board. You can see the points. And the idea is that these are games. These are learning games, though. As a matter of fact, they're very important ones, not only to learn, but a lot of employers look at capture the flag events as a real world experience. If you go to certain cyber cons, you do some of the online capture the flag, and I'm not saying you have to be number one or something, but you succeed. You're on the list. You complete one. You make so many points. You're part of a team that did come in third or something. You can put that on your resume as something that you've really done, and it gives you a nice talking piece. So it's actually why our final project is to have you folks build your own capture the flag system. So it's important that you spend some time playing with one. So I'm going to do them all a little bit. You're going to be provided, and I did not do anything. This is not my creation. The site credit for it is in the README file. A gentleman who only disclosed his first name, and I'm forgetting it right now because it's not on my notes, but neither here nor there. He created this thing called the Ridiculously Easy VM. and it's a capture the flag VM. It's based on the Rick and Morty theme, so you'll see those characters and images and things that if you happen to know that show. And so what is it? It's a virtual machine. So you bring it up just like any of the others. So for this class lesson 10 assignment, you will be booting up once again Kali VM. GNS3 can be shut down. That was our last time in GNS3 at the moment. And for this course, for this class in the topology. So we're going to have the Kali Linux VM to be our attack machine. And then we're going to import, if you haven't already done so, the instructions are in here, and you're going to bring in the capture the flag VM. And so at that point, you know, then you have a situation where you are going to, what do? Well, they're usually kind of black boxes in a sense. They have, I'm doing one thing as I get set up here before I show you this. But anyway, they are just, it's a computer. It's a virtual machine. So you could imagine it could be in the cloud. It could be a real server, or whatever you want to say in a sense about it. And so it's got certain things open, so we're going to bring it up. We have to deal with it. We have to figure out even so much as to what IP it's on. Now it's going to be on host only. So what I'm going to do is I've already brought all these up. I've got my Kali Linux VM up, and I've got this, Kali Linux VM and the ridiculously easy. Let me share my screen, and then you're going to see browser in the background, but we'll leave that alone. So here I have the ridiculously easy VM. The ridiculously easy VM, actually, if you wake it up, you can try to log in. I actually tried some just for giggles, but they were pretty smart about that. Nothing seemed to work at that localhost login. Maybe you'll be better luck to get in, but you will see that it does give you an IP, an idea. It gives you its IP address because it says there's an admin console at 192.168.56.101, and then port 9090, and then there's an IP6 version of it as well. So we know its IP address. 192.168.56.01. We could have done a ping sweep right within map if we didn't know. And some of the capture the flag VMs, they're really black boxes. You boot them up, they tell you to boot them up on host only, and then you have to do a ping sweep to find its IP. So what we want to do is come over here and, of course, do some stuff from our Kali Linux machine. Now, I want to show you something, and I mentioned this, I know, in the first lecture, but the Kali Linux machine is a default Kali Linux machine, except that I added a second network interface. So there's two. There's ETH0, ETHO, and ETH1. And the ETH0 should be on the host-only adapter, and it should have the fixed IP of 192.168.13.13. And then on the other hand, then you have the NAT adapter, which allows you to get the outside world. And so if we take we bring up a terminal, and then we take a look at the IP addresses that have been assigned, we're going to actually see that our 192.168.13.13 in this case has been assigned to ETH1, and ETH0 has a host-only adapter. Now, the reality is we could make this work because we're attacking a machine that's on that same 56. But for many of the exercises, like some of the others earlier, and I've mentioned it, so I'm just pointing it out and showing it this time. But the way it's supposed to really work is actually, you see there's ETH0 and ETH1, and then there's two different connections, wired connection 1 and wired connection 2. So the reality is the way it's supposed to be set up is ETH0 should go with wired connection 1. So all you have to do to fix this, if these IPs are flopped, if you're trying to do like the social engineering toolkit example and some of those, if these IPs are flopped, it won't work. So what you have to do to fix it is just come up here to the right corner and then expand one of these and just change it. So ETH0 goes with wireless 1. As soon as I change it, it'll flash and change, and I can come back in here and see that it did change. And if I rerun the if config, just hitting the up arrow here, then you're going to see that I have a IP address of that, the fixed IP is up where I want it, and now I have a NAT address so I can actually get outside. So if you do see those flipped, you just go in here and change the settings, and it'll do it automatically. So now that I'm here, even though we're on slightly different subnets, I should be able to, within the way VirtualBox works, ping that other machine. So I'm able to ping 192.168.56.01, right? So, okay, cool. So what's probably going to be the first thing we do? Well, let's just do a good old nmap of this one. We'll just do a default one. You might decide you want to do a different, and you're going to need to do some different ones. But if we run an nmap scan against our target, then we can at least start figuring out, besides that 9090 there, what's there, what's open, right? It'll take a little bit to run that scan. So what I'm going to do while that's multitasking, I'm going to use this area here to create another workspace. And I'm going to come over to workspace 2. And while that's processing the nmap scan, I'm going to go ahead and launch a browser. The first stage of attacking one of these capture the flag systems is just to check it out. You want an nmap scan, you want to see what's all running on it, you want to try to log into those ports, maybe use NCAT, or if it's SSH, see if you can log in. If it's FTP, see if you can log in anonymously. If there's a web interface, a website, in this case, it looks like there is, given the HTTP, that it's showing us right here. See, it says it's HTTPS, actually. So we can try those things. And so let me see if my nmap scan's done yet. Nope. What? A retransmission cap hit. Now I can ping, but it's not seemingly liking to run. Let's see if we can get there. There's something else up today. Maybe I did not sacrifice enough pizza to the demo gods today. Let us see if we can get to it by the browser. 101. And then we need to put, since they say so, the 9090. So we're putting in the IP that they gave us. And we'll see if this, now it's going to tell us it has an insecure connection. Now, why is that? That's because they self-signed it. It's an HTTPS, but we can't get out to the internet to validate it. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell it, yeah, we're okay with that. We're going to add an exception. We're going to see it's a self-signed certificate. So we're going to confirm the security exception, and it's there. Oh, and looky there. Just by visiting this web page, we've already found our first flag in the system. And there you go. There's a flag. I don't know what the clue means, or if I do, I'm not going to give it away, but sometimes the little text and things will hint you to other things to check out. It's kind of interesting. There's a username box here, so maybe we could do some SQL injection or something, but there doesn't seem to be a password box. So that's interesting. But we have found at least one of the flags. Come on, nmap, work for me here. Why is this failing when... We'll try it again, because we know we can talk to it. We can ping, we can surf over there. It was giving up only on one port, so maybe I should have let it continue to go, but we'll see. But you want to get your nmap. There we go. So now we got our nmap scan. So we know that at least in the most commonly used 10,000 ports that nmap scans by default. Well, that makes sense. Zeus admin. Okay, so that's where we were. We were at 90, right? So we visited that page already, but we do see that there's an FTP available. We do see that there is a SSH available, and then there's just a regular web. Now, the reality is we might want to check all the ports. We might want to do additional nmap scans to look deeper, like into that FTP. So we might say, you know, I want to look at just that port 21, right? I want to look a little more at this. Let's take a look at that FTP. And we can go back. We could do other types of scans, right? We might want to fingerprint the service, get the versions back and stuff. So, of course, in this case, yeah, that's not really helping me much. So let's add the big capital A hyphen here. So we're going to do an nmap switch A, capital A, which is the what I call the anything and everything flag, right? It's going to try to version. Usually don't do that across a whole machine or across a whole range because it's very slow, but on one port, one machine, this could be useful for us. And you can do this against some of the additional things. And of course, you're going to want to try to log in. If it's anonymous FTP, we'll know that here in a minute. And so anyway, this is, you're going to take and use all the things you've learned up to date to try to see how many flags you can get. We've already found one, and there, I know if you work through the lesson and see what's shown there, you'll have already been given access to a couple. So let's scroll back up and see here. So this one has given us a lot more information. If you're, excuse me, really paying attention, you will see that the screen actually already shows another flag, but it is allowing, so it's FTP. Sadly, it's not the one that we use that we could exploit. So it's not that version, but maybe if you look it up, maybe there's something else you can do against that version. But it tells you what it's running. It does allow anonymous FTP. So we can just connect over there if we want to and log in with anonymous, which is spelling out anonymous and then putting in like test@test.net or your email address as the password. And then you can poke around on that machine and ultimately you'll find another flag in the FTP folder, which we could see actually up there from that output. So I want you all to do that. That's your last lesson, is to just pound on this thing. Scan it out the heck, scan everything, look for all the open sources and ports, try to log into them, try to visit. I didn't just visit the regular website without the 9090. You would want to do that. You'll want to try to log in as anonymous on FTP. You might want to fire up Hydra and pound away on those interfaces, see if you can get an access on the SSH. Anything you can think of, you can try. And try to find as many flags as you can. And then there is kind of buried a little Easter egg in there that there is some help in the lesson if you look for it, to help you ultimately work your way through it. And I ultimately want you all to complete it because it's a very fun exercise, actually. You'll see a lot of different examples of things we've talked about, some things we've done, other things we haven't. So a great, finishing up a project and set of exercises for this class. And it really dovetails into your final project, because what you're going to have to do in the final project is you're going to have to build your own capture the flag system. So you're going to be on the other side. You're going to, and there's some instructions in the final project, but you're going to probably download and use an older version or a different version of Linux, maybe because you want to piggyback on some of the vulnerabilities that are already there. You're going to have to set up a few things like a web server, FTP server, SSH. We've done some of this before. We set up SSH all the way back in with an apt-get, right? All the way back in Network Foundations. You were ostensibly supposed to do some additional process or service in system admin, as well as in logging and monitoring. So whether you're playing with web or email or FTP or SSH or all of the above, one of the ways I tell students is just when you do that first install for your, ultimately for your final project, capture the flag VM, install it all, whether you use it or not. And then you can decide what you want to use and what you don't want to use. But you'll have to create a theme, create a little web page, put your own flags, and there'll be, like I said, more. But once you work through one and kind of unlocked your way through one, then I think that'll really help. And I've found with past students that it definitely does help. And then you can able to switch and sort of get on the other side of things and go, okay, cool. Now I can build one myself. And so that is there is at the very end of the lesson, there is a kind of a last section that's just on breaking and making and breaking capture the flag systems. So there's some more hints of things you should try, I believe even some resources out there, and some things to think about. And so, but keep in mind, as you work to beat this capture the flag system, as you work to learn some new pen testing tricks and some new attacks and exploits and scans, and just repeat and reuse many you've learned all along, you theoretically, there is a way to turn on OpenVAS in Kali, and you could run a whole OpenVAS scan against the darn thing if you want to. It's up to you. That's now you're getting here at the end. You've gotten all the basics. So where do you go? Do all those basics, do some additional research on your own, try some additional tools, and try to follow the clues to finding, the additional flags. At the end of the day, if you find them all, you will ultimately gain root access to this box. And you will have it's in the lesson, I don't remember, but a certain number of points. The flags have, there's a number of them, and they're worth 10, 20 points or whatever, so it adds up. And that's the way, if you were doing it online through one of the, I played just briefly, I didn't have a whole lot of time last year, but the Sans Institute, they do a really neat online con every year around, they call it KringleCon, around Christmas, and they have some capture the flag and things you can do online. Once again, I always go to these security cons, as all you folks know, but I've so far never had time to really sit down and be part of a capture flag or take a team and do it. Someday maybe I will, maybe I'll do it with some of you. But they're fun to watch, and I'll sit down and kind of look over people's shoulders and see what they're doing and watch the leaderboard. And some of them are much more elaborate than just one virtual machine. They may be a whole series of virtual machines, a whole series of virtual networks, and you break in from one thing and you pivot over here. So that's why they're considered, especially if they're built well, very real world, especially those ones that are competitive, as a very real world experience. So we had a student pop in and out, but seemed to be having some technical difficulties as Mike wasn't coming on for sure, I could see. But since we don't have any other student visitors today, we're going to go ahead and call this and just go. And hopefully I'll get this stuff. As you know, you guys have been in the program for a long time now. So we'll get it posted and uploaded a little later this evening. And you can watch the video and the link will be in the learning management system. Thank you very much.